Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Take 5 with Steph. And this week, I'm joined by Rob, the founder of Inflective, who excels at helping brands reduce the path to purchase. I can't wait to dive into this conversation. Welcome, Rob. Why don't we start with you sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Hi, Stephanie. I'm happy to be here. So my name is Rob Manne, a sort of long-term marketing, communications, and content person. Worked for many agencies and also did sales at those agencies. But in 2020, I started Inflective, which is a HubSpot consultancy and revenue operations provider. And essentially, we help implement and optimize systems that help companies grow.
Excellent. Tell me a little bit about what inspired you to start your business, especially in such a interesting time in 2020. Tell me more about that.
Well, I like to talk about opportunity for any entrepreneurs, right? So, people can do anything, but you have to match whatever skill you have with whatever's in the marketplace. And I was working with a client, just as a marketing client of mine, and they bought HubSpot, and they said, "You're going to really like this. This is going to help us with our marketing." And I really saw through that process that there's a gap that with that technology in particular, where they thought it would be the cure-all to what they needed, and in some cases it was, but there was a real gap in between what they needed it to do and the actual configuration of this tool in order for them to make full use of it. And so that sort of initial experience led me to then say, okay, who else is struggling with this problem? What might that look like as a solution provider? And who would be the people to help me with this? So there's now three of us on the team, and we're basically former marketing, operations, and sales pros who kind of really like the operations side of it, and we play that we play that role for companies who maybe they have marketing, they have salespeople, even customer success, but they don't have that operations level. So that's really where we help and dig into that to help them to go back to doing the things that they want to do.
That's great. That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about what are the types of gaps businesses should look out for, so then they know to consider working with someone like you. Like, what are those gaps?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so typically, and there was a question you sort of suggested about sort of how we get business. It's kind of related to that, in that usually people run into an operations gap when they want to do something else, right? This is probably going to be sound familiar to you, but usually it's when they want to get more leads, let's say, and it's all about the leads. And then you start to sort of dig in to be like, okay, so how have after those leads have come in, what have you done with them? Say, well, some people, we responded to a few of them, but some of the other ones we didn't really do anything with. And it's like, okay, well, how are you managing those leads? Who's responsible for getting those leads? So there's usually operational things that are there that generally in the revenue operations cycle, which is essentially everything from completely brand net new prospects right through to then becoming a sales inquiry, then through to becoming a customer and hopefully repeat business, where there's some sort of a gap that emerges that a tool or a process or people can help fill, and those are the things that usually by doing, let's say, some sort of an audit, or you look at your customer experience, or you even talk to your team, talk to salespeople, you talk to marketing, ask about their pain points, and they're going to start to tell you a lot of these things where they're like little incremental things sometimes that can add up over time, that can lead you to missing out on a huge opportunity, spending a lot of time on busy work that isn't actually driving growth, or maybe people are churning for a reason that you had no idea they were churning for. Really depends on the business.
That's interesting. So if I'm a leader, an executive, or a business owner, and I'm curious, why are the leads not converting? So we're getting maybe a lot of vanity metrics that all these leads are coming in, but why are we not getting the conversion we were expecting? That doesn't have to be necessarily our forecast or what we estimate, but why aren't we getting that traction, like seeing some incremental progress? That's probably when it's time to start investigating it, to see if it's a people exploration, a system, or a process or a tool, like something like that. Do I have that right?
Yeah, yeah. And so we jump around between sales, marketing, and customer success. But so for the purpose of this discussion, I was just talking to someone last week, a sales enablement professional, and he was saying we were talking about different things, and I sort of said, if your sales team, if you when you meet with them, if they can't accurately take you through the opportunities that are expected to close in this month, then the question becomes, okay, why is that? Is it because we don't have a tool to capture it? Is it because you're not close enough to the customers to actually know where things are at? So there's sort of this gray area that, that data should be generated by people, whether it's in marketing, sales, success. And that data needs to be served up to the people to be able to look at and make a decision. So forecasting is a great example. It would be like, if you can't forecast accurately, or if that goes on where you're expected to close much more in a quarter than you actually do, then you need to go back, and it's not fun work, right? To say, okay, people, why is it? But usually it's not the people. It's often, let's figure out what tool we should be using, and then what data we're capturing in order to effectively, know the state of our business, and then use that to make better decisions.
I like that. That's great. I think we have a similar approach of starting with the people and investigating. That's probably why we enjoy connecting and geeking out on this topic a little bit. That's wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about the end-to-end process for driving predictable revenue. Like that sounds like awesome and amazing, and every business would like that. So what are some of the hurdles we have to get over as businesses to really make sure we're ready for that? Like, how do we know when we're ready to adopt this philosophy?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I think it's funny because the term revenue operations, if this is what we're going to talk about now, this kind of already existed, but it wasn't really called that. And I would say everyone is already in that business, whether they know it or not. So what I mean by that is, if you open a corner store, I was just in New York. So if you open up a hot dog vending stall in Times Square, God help you, but how many you want to know pretty early on, how are you getting your customers? You want to know what are they going to buy from you? What are the prices they're buying them at? And then how what your profitability rate is and how many hours you need to work and all those things. So those things, generally were for the longest time able to be done just with pen and paper or Excel files or whatever. It was something a lot more manageable. But essentially, as your business grows and gets increasingly sophisticated, that's when you start to say, okay, I think we need to pay a little bit more attention to the process that we have and use tools to help us manage the process. So if you go from one, I'm just making this example up on the spot, so we'll see how this goes. But if you go from one hot dog stall to now you have 20 hot dog vendors around New York, and they're, maybe they're all doing, most of them are doing hot dogs. Some of them have hamburgers as well. Some of them have falafel. You're starting to see variety, and you need to understand, okay, how profitable is each one? How are we seeing the data change between the Times Square person and the Greenwich Village person and the Brooklyn person? And what times of the day are they getting the most traffic? Or should they be working weekends? That's when you start to then say, okay, there's way more variables that we need to be able to track and we need to be able to measure. Let's have a system in place to be able to do that, and then you sort of go from there. Now, in terms of if you get into like recurring revenue and SaaS businesses, let's say, I would say, and maybe B2B as well, that increasingly moving from a transactional model to something that's a little bit more, let's call it CRM driven, for lack of a better term, that if you're not able to sort of, as we know, it's always less expensive to get repeat customer to your hot dog stand than it is to get a brand new customer. And so if you're able to start, recording who you're doing business with, and then starting to use that data to then say, okay, well, the people, 50 people that we did business with in Times Square happen to be accountants. If you're able to capture that information, then you say maybe we should do advertising on the accounting networks, or Facebook groups, LinkedIn, what have you. You then now you're generating data about your customers and your prospective customers. Then you're able to then say, okay, how do we want to do, if these are the people that are our ideal customer profile, how do we then say, let's take the data that we have, use that across our marketing and sales efforts, and then sort of use that to double down on what's working and move away from the things that aren't. So just to sum up everything, I guess, if you think about the areas you need to focus on as a business, to say, okay, what are the drivers of your business, and how do you track those in some sort of a tool? So if you're selling through Shopify, and and you're starting to see a certain volume of data come in, then you want to then say, okay, how do I then take that data and use that to make decisions on, okay, so here are the people who are our best customers, here are the people who aren't our best customers, so you start to refine your ICP, you start to refine what it is your core business has started to do. And it's really that you hit a bit of an inflection point, which is what we're called inflective, because you're starting to see, okay, to get to that next level of growth, we need to take what we're doing and level that up a little bit to then move into areas where we're making decisions based on data.
Okay, so my understanding is, this is interesting, I'm laying over my experiences. You first have to figure out, when you start, like, what is working, and just prove that that's working for you and build off that. And then
Yeah.
when you start to scale and want to, and grow exponentially, you're going to diversify and try different things, whether that's expanding locations, trying a new product or service line, or, just volume, depending.
Yeah.
And then you also are, if you layer on that you're going to try and market in a different way across many channels, and collecting data and collecting information about your ideal buyer, then that is the inflection point of all this information coming in. It might be tough to sort through that if it's not done properly, to know, like, what is really relevant and what can you ignore, and how do you redefine your ideal buyer based on, as your business is growing and changing, of course your ideal buyer would be growing and changing with you. And so that's can seem easier to say than actually do. Is that a great way to phrase that?
Yes, and it does sound daunting, but what we love about the work that we do is, when you look back at it, it's kind of like when you look at the Grand Canyon. Here's another example. You look at the Grand Canyon, it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This whole thing, it's like this beautiful and perfect, and millions of years of development. But actually, if you were to start to drill into that, you'd look and see that there's different layers, and there's things that got to that point, that there were things that were done to enable to build that beautiful natural wonder that we have. So as an example, you can say, okay, so we're starting to generate. One example I can give you is a client of ours, was getting data, and when people would sign up for this service, there'd be a certain amount of information that was being captured, but they didn't have enough information to actually be able to then say, like, opt into marketing emails, for example, or to find out, what size of business was the company, the people ran that worked there. And by then saying, okay, now we're going to start to capture this more information, that then let them say, okay, now we know this much about this customer and our customers. That allows us to make this decision for our marketing campaign. Or it allows us to then say, hey, sales team, let's target this micro niche more than we did before, because we have more information. So it's constantly an act of sort of like, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, but we kind of want to start to learn and to capture. And you're always, our work sometimes never ends, because there's always more information we can gather, more ways that we can segment, more value that can be provided to the customer and to the prospects.
Thank you for that. That's a good way of saying it. Tell me a little bit more about how you help brands reduce the path to purchase, and how that impacts revenue.
Yeah. So gosh, there's so many examples. Probably one of the small ones that might be a helpful one to talk about is, one of our clients they're in the glaucoma care industry. So a few years ago, they came up with a revolutionary new glaucoma treatment, and it involves sort of a machine that's kind of disrupting some of the more very expensive, very long wait list processes for glaucoma care. And so this company, put out some noise about it, did a series of investor presentations, and now they're in the process, if you know the medical healthcare industry, the process of working with specific jurisdictions to get it regulated, to get it approved, and that's a pretty lengthy process. So as a result, they've had to do a lot of building credibility and a lot of relationships with different jurisdictions and different subject matter experts in those jurisdictions. So the big pain point that the team had when they started to talk to us was, we've got too many inquiries coming to our website because they go to trade shows, they've been putting out press releases. And, if you think about it, there's patients who have glaucoma, or glaucoma patients who want to get treated. There's doctors who are experts and they want to know and understand this technology and know if they can use it. Then there's all the different regions and all the different hospitals that want to take advantage of this. So as a result, the sales team, which was like 5 people, they're meeting with people all around the world, getting inquiries, and they're trying to sort through not just the list of inquiries, but then sometimes they don't know what the inquiry is until they get on a call. And so they were super bogged down. And their big challenge was, we want to keep everybody engaged, but we also, excuse me, but we also don't want to lose any hot leads for the jurisdictions that we're close to getting approved in. And so we work with them to develop quite a simple series of, expanded forms with automations that then said, okay, here's what we know about you now. Here's a series of emails that we've drafted in order to kind of keep you warm for the people who aren't as imminent a client, a prospect for them. But here are the people, let's figure out a way to pass through the ones that are in the right markets, that are the right role, and that have a comment that we feel is going to be directly relevant to the 3 markets that they had available in Europe. And we track that to those people, so those salespeople, so they can get to those people right away and build relationships. So as a result, they were really able to move after about 3 months to really build the relationships with the people that mattered, but also start to do, let's call it CRM or sort of marketing related nurturing of relationships, where people are signed up to get their monthly newsletter. They're getting updates about the next trade show that's happening, but they're still feeling good about the company rather than not hearing anything.
Thanks, Rob. That's great. And I'm sure there are a lot of interesting things with tools and tech stack that comes into play to make sure everything goes smoothly. So you tell us a little bit more about, when you talk about tech stack, how that plays into the work you do to actually integrate and filter all that information.
Yeah, that's a great question. So also another possibly very daunting thing that when you look at it from far can be overwhelming. But basically, when we talk about a tech stack, so excuse me. So we're a HubSpot provider, so we spend a lot of time working with HubSpot. But increasingly, more and more companies have 5, 10, 15 platforms doing different things, sometimes overlapping, and they were usually acquired for a specific purpose for a company, but over time, those things there may be some overlap. And so the big question that we always encourage people to do is to say, okay, when you're looking at a new piece of technology, what's the value it's providing? Like, what are the requirements you have? And specifically to say, are those requirements being met by an existing tool? If they are, you might want to think about it. Or are there other people outside of your specific team, if you're in a bit of a bigger company, but even teams as small as 20 people can have siloing, where one person's using this tool, another person's using another one, and there could be overlap. But overall, the goal is you want to have tools to help you be more efficient and more effective. But once you start to use more and more tools, that's when you can possibly lose focus. And particularly the data that you're generating can get out of control. So the first thing is it the right tool for you? Second thing is the tool optimized and implemented in a way that actually matches the business? And are the people trained to use it effectively? A lot of our work is ensuring that people understand how to use it. And data, something, it's not fun to talk about, but sometimes people just are entering in the wrong data. And so as a result, you have very unclean data. So stepping back from there, I think we wanted to talk about integrations. So sort of the nirvana for the tech stack that, some companies want to use is, let's say they've got this tool for, online shopping. So, they've got a checkout tool and it's doing all their retailing. And then they've got this tool for payments. And then they've got this tool for CRM. And so those are great tools on their own, but generally there'll be a point which you need to, after someone's made, they filled their cart, they made a purchase, you want payments to integrate, of course, with that. So boom, Stripe and Shopify should work together. And so you've got that information that's being passed through. But then once you've done that, then it's then to say, okay, how do we move further from that integration to say, okay, now we've generated this information, we know this about our customer, wouldn't it be great to pass through this information? So yeah, determining the tools that allow you to integrate is generally something to look at, because not all tools are equal and some things play well with others and some things don't. There are third parties that you can look at called like Zapier. There's a number of other ones that allow you to bridge those things. But I think at the end of the day, you don't want to go too overboard with integrations, because you then have the risk of kind of spending months and months and months on something that it can add value to you, but you're losing the 3, 4, 6 months you're having to integrate that. So we like to look at integrations and tools in themselves to say, okay, let's figure this out. Let's see the value from this specific tool or this integration, and then get it working. And then we can move on to the next thing and move on to the next thing. So I think the last thing to say about integrations is my public service announcement is, when they're so easy, yes, anybody can turn them on and very easily connect Salesforce with whatever. But then sometimes you could spend months actually cleaning up something that it was so easy to integrate that people didn't see the consequences of it. So taking time to plan that out is definitely worth doing.
I appreciate what you're sharing. I've been on the other side of that after the tools are set up and the integration has been put in place.
Yeah.
And there's this appealing motivation to have automation and things be synchronized.
Yeah.
But I've seen what it does to a team when connections break and the amount of maintenance and effort is taken to maintain if it's not the proper integration for what they need. And it ends up being like thousands of dollars each month just to maintain the setup versus have something move seamlessly. So what I think is really hard for businesses to understand is that setting it up is just one step. There's the ongoing maintenance of it. If you think of a car, right? You buy the car, it's a brand new car, it's all set up, but you still need to get the oil change. You still need to rotate the tires. You got to change the tires. And with integrations, someone needs to be dedicated on your team overseeing and looking at that and making sure that things don't break down. And so I always like to think, what are the native integrations between the tools, and start there, because usually they're going to be more supported independently. And really make sure it's worth it to add on all these like hooks and workarounds to have everything. Is the data you're going to get from that worth it with the cost of upkeeping that system long term?
Yeah, and you're totally exposed to a bit of a risk there, because if the person who built that for you leaves or is unavailable, then you're really dependent on that sort of hack that was done.
Yeah, and I've seen, unfortunately, people spend like over $10,000, like some businesses initially set up, and then even more ongoing maintaining that for a few years, and then getting tired of it and just giving it all up and going back to something simple, and maybe not having the data. So to me, that always feels a shame, because that to me, that exasperation, it's when I would want to bring someone like you in to say, okay, wait a second, let's build on what is working and refine it and make sure we're not, stopping everything. It's just making it more effective for what your business is and what your business needs. So that's why I really find what you do valuable, because it's so sad when someone decides, okay, that's it, we've done it. And then there's this resistance to think about automation and do that. Like if, I've seen businesses that have been in business for over 10 years and they've they're still thinking historically. So a lot of my work is helping them work through those assumptions
Yeah.
and educating them what could be different this time, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't think any, especially if you have product people, love product people, but sometimes their desire is to automate everything, and they develop these great. Let's say if it's a SaaS brand, let's say, and there's an integration with a product, they have all these really sophisticated things going, data being passed back and forth, and there's like, if you look at the export, it's like columns like into the quadruple digits, right? But that often doesn't help people navigate it, right? It's sort of like we really like to think about what's going to be like a bit of an MVP or something that's going to give the most value for the least amount of work, and just start there. And then to say, okay, maybe we want to do the bells and whistles later, maybe we don't, but there's like our big view is companies have so many hundreds of things to spend their budgets on. You have to make a really good case for systems and related processes to get that revenue, to get that budget. And so
Yeah.
if that money could be spent towards people, towards marketing, towards whatever, some of the tools, these platforms are getting more expensive every year, right? And so
Mhm.
and they're certainly not, all of them aren't doing a great job of telling you how to actually, pay less, or, maximize your subscription, or get the most value out of it. So it's helpful. If it's not us, then having people like us inside where you've dedicated resources and team time, as you said, a lot of times people are doing this off the side of their desk, and that's okay if they've got that time. But in a lot of cases, nobody's accountable for some of these tools and processes internally.
Mhm.
So there's usually
Yeah.
one person who's like kind of operations-y on a marketing team or a sales team, that they're kind of like this. But in a lot of cases, they're not being compensated for it. It's something they're doing, and it's kind of a thankless job. So we love working with people where there's a senior person that gets it and is like, no, this is priority, because it's either pay now or pay later, right? If we don't do these things and have the governance in place, have the process, we're going to be in trouble later on. So they want to do things that are a lot more sustainable.
Yeah. Also, with the software and systems that you're referring to, there's a lot of automatic pay price increases now year over year
Yes.
that are happening.
Yeah.
And that is causing some friction with some of the businesses I work with, where
Yeah.
they might really appreciate everything that is working, but they don't appreciate just an automatic increase without
Yeah.
an explanation and not understanding the additional value or why it
Mm-hmm.
matters in that. And they
Yeah.
just see the price going up and up, and they're not seeing the payout for that.
Yeah.
Potentially and possibly because of the upfront work that you refer to that didn't happen. So what are some ways that businesses can maybe make sure they're not overpaying and some of these things? Like, do you have any tips? I think that'd be really interesting. Like, how do we make sure we're asking for the best price before we just, decide not to go forward with that system?
Yes. Okay. Well, first of all, there's just so many things we could talk about here. We did a session called "Should You Break Up with Your Marketing Platform" for Valentine's Day one year,
Oh, that's
which
interesting.
is pretty fun, because it like generally a lot of the opposite is true. So where kind of like you've probably come into this, where there's a company and you're working at a company and you're like, why are we paying for all these tools?
Yes.
And like for us, if people don't know how to answer that question, it's like, do we need to be paying for these, right? Like, let's save money. So I think the first question is, do you actually need the tool at all? Is the first thing. And so
Yes.
that's a
Yeah,
big,
that's a good
like,
question.
yeah. So and like you really need to say, is this something that we need? Because often there could be this really expensive, one of what do you call it? All-in-one tool that does everything, but it's like we only need this specific use case. Like we only
Yeah,
need Calendly because we
that's
want to just,
very common. Very
yeah.
common. Yeah.
And so we often like to say, like, as generating any data is better than generating no data. So you can almost always, I don't want to say that, start with, let's say Calendly, figure out what you're automating, with a single use tool, and then you're kind of setting the wheels in motion, and then you can say, let's now graduate to a more expensive tool. And you can say the same thing about a freemium versus a, entry level subscription versus, you don't need to start with enterprise either. But taking the time to really, research the product, look at competitive products. It generally pays, and there's places like, the Gartner has the Magic Quadrant thing. There's a lot of places you can find, but knowing that, like, a lot of cases, you're working on it off the side of your desk, as we said. It's 11 o'clock at night. You need something to solve a specific problem. So just look to do something that's, maybe don't prepay for a year, do something for like a month or two, and then evaluate how it's working, and then sort of move back and say, okay, this is what this offers, but are there other things that are available that could be a better bang for your buck? But I would say too, is once you go from, let's call it self-serve purchase of these things, to things that involves a sales rep and like demos, and like, I would say take the time, don't feel any pressure to go on someone else's timeline. So just put the inquiry in, be sure to bring in the decision makers on your side that are going to be helpful, while also not making it a cast of thousands where everybody has to have a say. So generally, we really love it when someone takes the time to write down their requirements, and then they can share that. We had a client that we're actually starting work now. They did the most amazing requirements document we were ever seen, because we sort of helped them with it, but they generally, like, you're gonna have to take the time to write these down anyway, or you just want to have, you're gonna have 5 meetings with 5 different, providers telling them the same thing. So just write it down, get alignment of that, and then it's something you can hold up and move forward with, and use that as the barometer of what is it that we're actually solving for.
Yeah, I've seen that work really well, because you can decide whether the software will work based on the requirements and save yourself a lot of money if you
Yeah.
had a good hypothesis up front before you even start getting involved in anything. So that's
Yes.
the investment to do a business case, to me, wins and pays out every time.
Yeah.
Even if you decide not to go forward, to me, that's a win, because it's money and time not spent that you would have spent if you didn't investigate and think that through first. So it's great advice.
The other thing that I would say is, think of it as a bit of a roadmap. And it's funny because, especially if you work at a SaaS company, it's like you think of the roadmap for your own product, right? Or even if you're like, bricks and mortar, like you've got an agency, you've got a roadmap for, we're going to offer this service and this time. But we need to have roadmaps for our own growth platforms. And what we mean by that is, here's what we're going to use right now. We have these immediate needs at this stage of our business. And if things go well, we're going to have these needs a little bit later. So rather than be reactive to those things and be like, oh my gosh, we've just signed a partnership with X brand, we're getting thousands more visitors to the website. Like, it's like, okay, what are the tools we're going to need for the changes in our business? And you can be like, if we're talking HubSpot, you can say, okay, we're going to start with Starter Sales Hub. And then we know we're going to want to do more marketing once we have more sales going. So then maybe next year we're going to purchase, Marketing Hub. And what's great about that is you can then say, okay, is it one tool that we need, or should we look at multiple tools? And I think that even thinking about not just tools, but like related processes that you need to use to track your data, and say, okay, we know we're going to need it at some point, but not right now. It allows you to have better discussions with people around yes or no, right? Like, yes, we're going to buy this, or no, we're not, and that's it.
Excellent. It's always good to make a decision. Just make a
Yeah.
decision. It's good. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to know, what advice would you go back and tell yourself in 2020, based on everything you've been through the past few years? What do you wish you could go back and tell yourself in the first year of starting your business?
So, like, as an entrepreneur, you mean?
Yeah, as a business owner, entrepreneur. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing is get a bookkeeper right away. And I think the broader lesson is, get subject matter experts right away, or outsource certain things sooner than you think. Because as a conservative entrepreneur, you're not generating a lot of money when you first start, right? You're in exploration mode and validation mode. And so, there are things that like, yes, I can do myself. I was keeping the books, I was managing certain things, but the more as we're now in year 4, and so there are much more things that I've worked with marketing. Even though I'm a marketing person, I've worked with marketing people to give me that distance from me, right? So
Mhm.
bring in different people that are subject matter experts because you can, just like we do, your time can be freed up from doing those tasks to get, to grow the business. And so I would say once you start to get a certain amount of comfort, think about who you can bring in that would be either a lower billing rate to you if you're thinking about billing rates, or, but I think it's a fine balance because you don't want to outsource everything. But there are things like, you know, I knew right away that I was going to get we had someone incorporate us, and then I knew that we were going to have an accountant. But bookkeeping was one thing that people who are quite comfortable with finance, because I've always run my own accounts and ran the budgets for that. I was a little reluctant to do that, but the bookkeeper has been a game changer for us.
That's really,
Yeah, so that's the big
that's good
one.
advice. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything you're really excited about in your business at the moment or working on that you'd like to share with us?
Yes. So other people may recognize that when you work with different companies, some people really need your help, but may not necessarily be always able to do the full extent of what you want to do, right? And so, we've this client that I told you that did the best requirements document ever. They are an online retailer, and what we're excited about with this client is they are moving from Salesforce to HubSpot, and they rather than just want to sort of centralize or manage one thing, they have basically tons and tons of use cases across multiple sales teams, and across customer success, that they want to then move. They want to move from multiple different products and sort of like separate processes into one tool. And so we're going to be able to help them at a pretty deep level over. It's like a multi-stage program over several months. So we really love it because we're going to do, let's say, quite advanced work where we're going to really, really get to do a lot of cool stuff that's really going to drive their business. Not that we don't love smaller clients where we're doing more one-off things here and there, but we love it when there's a big, complex challenge for us to get a hold of.
Well, it sounds like it's a great best-in-class example of what you're all about, too. That's probably why it's exciting.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
there's 3 of us on the team, and sometimes we work in pockets a little bit, but this is good because we're going to work, like more as a team a little bit because it's a bigger mandate, so it should be fun.
Well, great. Thanks so much for sharing all your thoughts and explaining a little bit more about this interesting Rev Ops perspective. That's a great buzzword, but we dived into a little bit deeper. And what I'm taking away is, understand what works, scale it, get some help to like codify and understand the data, and make sure that your team can articulate the journey of the buyer from beginning to end. And when they can do that, you're on the right track. And then you're just making sure you're tracking the right data and using that to prioritize your time in the right spot. That's me paraphrasing it,
It
but
sounds
that's
sounds
basically
so
what the
easy.
conversation, yeah, that's the conversation we had today. So thanks so much.
Awesome.
It was a pleasure to have you. And I'll be on the lookout for all your great content. I know you bring others in to help with your marketing, but you're also part of that. I can tell with your great articles and material that you share. So I appreciate reading everything that you and your team
Thank
produce.
you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and we were excited to have you on our show too. So yeah, let's keep talking operations and tech.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Rob. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.